afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this month's episode of the CJIS Brief. Today, we'll be covering documenting experiences abroad ethically. My name is Ashton Troxel. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm an intercultural programs advisor at CJIS, and I'm joined today by my wonderful co-hosts.
Hi, I'm Stephen Gonzalez. I'm the communication specialist here at CJIS, and my pronouns are he, him.
Hi there, I am Callie Rouse. I am also an intercultural programs advisor, and my pronouns are she, her, hers.
So why are we talking about documenting experiences ethically? We're thinking about social media, taking photos, sending photos to friends and family, doing blogs. So we live the majority of our lives on our phones. So as you travel, it's likely you're going to be taking photos and videos. You want to remember this experience for the rest of your life. What participants and travelers don't often consider is the larger context of their photos or their videos. The context can explain the history, the social context. There's so much that is said by every photo, right? You've heard the phrase, a picture is worth 1,000 words. But without any words, your photo could be portraying a very negative context. So we really challenge you to share photos and videos of your time abroad, but we want you to think critically about your image. Could your image be portrayed as insensitive? Does it perpetuate a stereotype? And are you doing your host community justice by the image that you're sharing? So I think all of us in this group have or know somebody who has shared a cringeworthy photo. So we're going to dive into cultural considerations and give you some tools as to how to document your experience ethically. And Stephen is going to kick us off with cultural considerations.
Thank you, Ashton. I think what's becoming more and more obvious when it comes to traveling abroad is this idea that we have to acclimate ourselves. Maybe we have to get used to a different language, using more public transportation, and not having a lot of the same access to typical American amenities, basically getting used to a lot of different social norms. But I think there are still a lot of our own cultural norms that we bring with us. And sometimes these norms don't necessarily fit in with these various cultures around the world. And one of those norms is taking photos and recording videos. I think in the age of social media and technology, it's very easy to do this, like Ashton mentioned earlier. But when you're traveling abroad, it's important to do that research on the country's cultural and religious views on photography or videography, because in many cases, you might find yourself in an uncomfortable situation. And if you actually end up committing these social faux pas or these cultural faux pas. And I just want to provide a few examples of how it might differ from country to country. So I have these 4 examples. So, for example, in many Asian countries, photographing 3 people at the same time in the same photo is considered very rude. The belief is that one of the 3 people, mainly the one in the center, will soon die. Another Asian taboo refers to taking photos of fish while they are next to a person, which is thought to bring very bad luck. In many, if not all, Islamic countries, you may not take a photo of any religious artifact or engraved images, as this is strictly prohibited in the Quran. And usually a lot of mosques, you'll enter a mosque and you will already see signage that tells you it's prohibited. Photographing faces of Islamic women, particularly if they're unaccompanied, is strongly discouraged. And that one seems like I can see that being so easy for someone to say, oh, I did not grow up around this. I want to take a photo of the people. It's so easy to commit this faux pas or to do this. And you just kind of have to keep yourself in check. In some cases, I know I mentioned the mosques, you are able to take photographs, but you have to ask permission. And only then, it's sometimes very limited portions of the mosque. In many South American countries, taking photographs of dead people is viewed as rude and insensitive. The belief states that the soul of the deceased will be trapped in the photo and will be unable to reach heaven. I know this is something that we've heard, throughout. Well, I have certainly heard that growing up. Similar customs can also be found in Asia. I know this might sound a lot like common sense, but you'd really be surprised. All three of us were talking earlier about the YouTube star Logan Paul, who filmed and posted his reaction to discovering a dead person in the suicide forest of Japan. He was seen laughing, and while I think he tried to backpedal, saying that he was trying to raise awareness on suicide. I think people could see pretty right through that. And that guy was canceled, even though I think he's made some interesting comeback. I don't know how, but I remember people being very outraged about that. In some parts of Africa, tribal customs prevent you from taking photographs without asking first, and will usually require a token of gratitude, a small gift, or a trade. With some tribes, you must first become an honorary member, and usually you have to go through a ceremony, and only then can you be allowed to photograph. I know several students who have gone on some African programs have been able to participate in these ceremonies and were able to acquire photos. In addition to that, be thinking about the historical significance of landmarks and how you might go about taking photos of those landmarks. You always want to be respectful of the space and its history. And I think a good primary example of that is thinking about concentration camps. So with that, I do want to provide a content warning. In the next slide, we will be showing images from the Holocaust. I will try to go over it as quickly as possible, but it really is such a strong message. So Ashton, if you could go to the next slide, please. So this is Holocaust. It's called Holocaust. It's by an artist, Shahak Shapira, and as a Jewish man himself, he was so tired of seeing people disrespect these very powerful landmarks around the world. So he grabbed photos from social media like Facebook, Instagram, at the time Tumblr, and he began to Photoshop these people into real photographs taken during the Holocaust. It's truly shocking to see these photos, but I think it carries a lot of weight. And it really makes you think about how easy it is to be disrespectful, even if at the time you're not really, you don't really think you're doing anything wrong. Something really interesting about these images is that everyone that he photographed, he reached out to him to say, I can't even believe I did this. Everybody that he reached out to showed some sort of, remorse over it, and, quickly deleted the images, from their social media pages.
And I would note of these particular photos in the last slide.
Oh, okay.
Those were taken at the Berlin Holocaust Memorial site, which I've been to. And it's very somber there, but it is these kind of about concrete blocks of different heights and things like that, to just kind of try to resemble the massive amount of people that were murdered. And I think it's particularly striking that they did this when it was a Holocaust memorial in Germany itself as well.
Yeah, it is pretty interesting. I know Callie and I have talked about visiting concentration camps, and it wasn't really until, being able to visit a concentration camp when you start to realize, should I be taking these photos? Should I be smiling? Should I be it is a very real moment, a kind of a raw moment where you realize wait, this is a reminder of millions of people that were murdered. And, I could see my brain now as an adult being comfortable to take a picture so that I can have a memory of me visiting the landmark, but being in the photo and smiling or whatever just doesn't seem right to me. And but again, you wouldn't really think about those things until maybe you're in that situation.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, like one particular situation that I experienced is I was visiting Auschwitz in Poland, and one of my peers that was along with me that I just met that day, but she was a young woman like me, and she asked that I take her picture with the she was like on the tracks leading into Auschwitz. And I felt kind of weird about it, but I didn't say anything at the time. But it was very like incongruous, like after I'd actually like taken the photo, that like I took a picture of a woman smiling in front of Auschwitz, one of the worst places in the world. But I think we're, so accustomed to like, like we go place that's important and we want to document ourselves there and things like that. And we don't necessarily think about, okay, what is this going to look like later? And out of that particular context in our own head.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what are some ways that you can ethically take photos or videos, and what are some best practices? And I think it's pretty simple, right? I think, I went to school, and studied journalism. And I think, one of the biggest things is, do you have permission to use this photo, right? Like you have to, you talk to your subject, you gain their trust, you have this authentic exchange with them, and oftentimes that can be through cultural exchange. You're just getting to know the person, and you're learning from them, they're learning from you, and it doesn't have to be like you're following them for days, right? Even in the moment, you want to learn something. When you're abroad, you want to learn something new that's different from the way that you live in the States. So, going the extra length to get that cultural exchange, I think, is super important and super vital to gaining the trust and permission from that person or the people that you're trying to take a picture from. Permission is just so important, and I think it really, speaks volumes to the person you're trying to capture in a photo or video. It shows that you have that level of respect and that you have that understanding. And then something that I think what a lot of people don't think about is the exposure. And what I mean by that is, like, for example, CGIS does do a annual photo contest. And we haven't done it in a couple years, but prior to the pandemic, we did a photo contest every October. And we asked students to submit photos. And before we actually implemented, more strict guidelines, students were submitting photos of people, of children that they were encountering abroad. And, it really had us think more internally about, the level of exposure. And if these subjects, if these people are aware of the level of exposure, who's going to look at that photo and how many people are going to see that photo. Because, the way that it works for us, if your picture wins, it gets hung up on the wall. And that means that for a whole year, strangers to these people that are in the photos will be looking at this photo. And I think something that is kind of very, I guess, has a lot of weight is, we had students that went on a program in Greece to visit a Syrian refugee camp. And, photos were strictly prohibited because these people were on the run and they were wanted by their country. And if they were found, they might be arrested or worse, murdered. And, taking a photo and exposing someone like that could be life altering. So you definitely want to be thinking about, and you want them to know that, hey, by the way, if this wins in the photo contest, it might be seen by like 50, 100, 200 people. Are you comfortable with that level of exposure? And then,
Sorry.
No, you're fine.
I was also, this made me think of like, I mean, like that kind of a situation is very serious, and there's a reason why like there's expressly banned of taking photos in those facilities. But also, I think it's important to put yourself in the shoes of the people who are getting their photos randomly taken. I know we've had multiple experiences of students who are BIPOC, and they go abroad and people keep taking their picture because they're like, and anomaly basically to them, that they're like, oh my gosh, there's a Black person in China, and like how uncomfortable it can be that like people are like sneakily taking your photo of you. I think Ashton's also talking about like
Oh,
being in
yes.
India and getting your photo taken, and like it's kind of weird when people are taking photos of you and they're not asking about it, but they think like you're interesting, so they're just like snapping like secret photos. It's very weird and uncomfortable to be that person who's experiencing it.
Yes. I'm actually so happy that you said that, because I feel like you just like, I was actually going to mention that, this experience happens to even Americans when they're studying abroad, and it can be kind of a weird feeling. And Ashton, I don't know if you want to expand a little bit more on your experience in India, but I do think it's interesting that it was happening on the flip side, right? Like the flip side was that it was happening to you and not you doing it to them.
Yeah, I always wonder like how many people shared this, because in India, WhatsApp is so popular and you can send something to like all 500 contacts in your phone. So like how many people have a picture of me? Like people would like hand me their babies to take a picture, which was very uncomfortable. And at first it was somewhat like amusing, but then as time went on, it kind of got like it like made me feel tired. So something to think about, and to kind of reverse it, like when we see something that's out of the ordinary, like someone doing laundry in a river versus like in a washing machine that we're used to, like you may want to take a picture of them, but would you feel comfortable someone taking a picture of you doing that, or waiting outside of a porta potty, or just eating with your friends in a park? Like that would make you feel uncomfortable, right?
Yeah, those pictures have always, been so confusing to me. And honestly, when I was younger traveling, I probably did commit a lot of these faux pas. But things like that, where it's like, yeah, it's like people are just living their lives. And something like, why would you want to? That's something that I don't feel is like holds a lot of value, something that I would like to go back and see, like, oh, I do want to look at that photo of the woman or the man that I took, bathing in a river or washing their clothes in a river, things like that. Like it just doesn't make sense. And it's just like kind of leaves like a weird taste in my mouth.
You're like, you are a voyeur.
Yeah, it's true.
It is creepy.
Uh, well, lastly, I do just want to talk just very little about, avoiding Superman and white savior complex. If you're not familiar with these terms, Superman complex is having an unhealthy sense of responsibility, or this belief that everyone else lacks the capacity to successfully perform a task, such that a person may feel a constant need to save others. And white savior complex refers to generally white people who act to help non-white people, with the help in some contexts perceived to be a little self-serving. And a big example of that is when we see photos of people visiting African tribes and small communities, and obviously like this is often like perpetuated and mostly committed in film and television too. So this also just doesn't apply to white people, but any person really that comes from a place of privilege can commit this. And I think like given like the context in within the United States, anyone traveling to a country that may not have the same access to healthcare or things like that, they're already have their own system. They're already surviving without you. So like, just make sure you're checking that before you're going abroad too. Oh, and then lastly, sorry. And lastly, colonialism. I really only want to talk a little bit about flags. This is something that CGIS has always kind of, we've always told students that we really don't want to see photos of flags. And I think it's just like really important to bring this up, because flags is actually really popular to travel with abroad, especially amongst our students. I know a lot of schools and colleges here at give out University of Michigan flags. And so, we have, a lot of photos have been submitted with a CGIS flag. And I just want to briefly talk about the colonialism implications, revolving around that. Um, Sorry, can I start over? Okay. And lastly, I just want to talk briefly about colonialism and just in the context of flags. I know a lot of schools and colleges here at the University of Michigan give out flags to students, University of Michigan flags. And so we always end up seeing those flags being submitted to, for photo contests. And really, we've kind of strayed away from utilizing those photos because flags can have a colonialism implication. I think something that maybe it may not be obvious to people, but decolonization, of Asia and Africa just started happening, in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s. So like a lot of these countries are still very much, sensitive and can be triggered to these flags, and I think like when we the flag, the implication that the flags carry is like, hey, I'm here. I made it. I'm marking this territory. This is my space. Me, like us, and it's like, that's not the case, right? Like you're in someone else's country. You are just a visitor. And I would just be mindful of that. And now Callie's going to talk to you a little bit about blogging.
Awesome. I'm going to talk a little bit about the blogging side of things. So we've mostly focused on photography and videos and things like that, but I also want to talk about what we write about places that we're going to. So one important thing to be thinking about is, am I telling someone's story with their permission? I think we come back with so many really fascinating stories from our times abroad, things that we've learned, insights that we've gained, and things like that. But it can be really important to think about, are you telling a particular person's story with their permission? Did they tell you that story because they, had trust in you and you were having a conversation in confidence, and they didn't expect that like your family and friends are all gonna like know about them and their life and things like that? And sometimes this can be helped by, making a story more anonymous and saying like, I had this kind of conversation and it was like enlightening to me in this way. Or it can be thinking about, is this a story that maybe is okay to tell my family and friends in person, but maybe shouldn't be placed on the internet where it's going to be there for who knows how long, for other people to see and know about this person, especially if you have like photos attached indicating like who it is, if they might not want to. So, but oftentimes you can ask people and be like, hey, like, would you be willing for me to like write about this in my blog? And they might be able to say like, yeah, sure, that's totally fine. Another thing to think about is how you're portraying the community that you're in. I think this is something that's really particularly important when we're going to put locations in the global south or developing countries, because of negative stereotypes that already exist about these parts of the world, that maybe they are impoverished or they experience a lot of violence, that people there don't have a lot of education, things like that, in those kind of narratives. And especially when you're going to places where people already have negative prejudices or they don't know anything about this country at all, it can be really important to think about how you're portraying that community and thinking about if you are challenging or mirroring Western narratives about that location. I think you can definitely honestly explain like what that place was like, if there was a lot of issues with poverty, and like there was like trash in the streets, and there was a lot of people who didn't have homes and things like that. Like that is okay to talk about, and you don't have to like not tell the truth about that experience that you had. But it's also important to talk about the other side of things and creating a multi-dimensional narrative about it. Talk about really cool things that you experienced there, good experiences, places that in that country or community that were really like, well off, and show some other kind of element to it there other than this kind of like drab, unhappy place that we may have this idea of in our common consciousness here in the West. So yeah, on a similar note to kind of the conversation we've had so far, I wanted to share an example of a way that a student combined a photo with a caption that was enlightening. So I think Ashton mentioned at the top about, it can be really important to provide context to the photos that you're taking. And without context, photos can come off in a certain light. So this is one of our former Bonderman fellows. She did an international fellowship, and she was in Thailand. And in Thailand, it is pretty common that there are these elephant sanctuaries, which are not actually that don't well take care of elephants. They use them basically for party tricks and to gain money from outsiders and things like that. And just looking at this photo, you may think that this is something that Ivy is engaging in, and that she maybe doesn't know that this is a problem, or has an idea that this is a problem, but like isn't really factoring that in. But in actuality, when we read the caption, Ivy demonstrates that she is very familiar with this. So Ivy's caption is, her name is Kami. She lives now at Conserve National Forest, a reforestation NGO operated outside of Pai in Thailand. To be clear, it isn't an elephant sanctuary. She doesn't do tricks, and you definitely aren't about to get a ride from her. After being used in a lock-in camp, Kami is being reintroduced to a more natural, wild way of living in preparation for staying at a national park nearby. She has to have her baby first, though, being pregnant now for 27 months. We were able to feed her and learn more about reforestation efforts and Kami's role in it. But let's be clear, Kami is always clean. So one, this is just educational in general. Elephants have really long pregnancies, apparently. I kind of knew this beforehand, but I didn't know it was this long. And another thing she's educating about, that there are positive ways you can interact with elephants in these countries, and that there's cool NGOs that are working against these issues in the country. So yeah, this is one really great example. I recommend checking out these blogs in general, as I think they have a lot of kind of really well-rounded ways of discussing the communities they enter. And Ashton?
Yeah, this story actually fits really well with our sustainable travel brief, because we talked about, going beyond the tourist attractions. So I'm sure when you Google elephants in Thailand, probably you would find elephant rides, etc. But this is an NGO. You may have had to pay money, but that money is going towards something really positive. So yeah, everything is connected that we do.
Yes, that's a great idea. Yeah.
So some final thoughts. Just making a genuine connection with locals in your host country is so important. I know it can be challenging, especially if you're on a program that's primarily American students, but go to a coffee shop that there aren't any tourists, and explore the city, on a Saturday morning on your own, and just try to make that effort, even though it is very uncomfortable at times. And be thoughtful in what you're documenting, what you're sharing about it, how you're captioning it, who your audience is, and use your platform wisely. Some of you have thousands of followers, so what are they going to perceive from your photo, even if they just read the first few lines of your post? And here's another example of a photo that a student submitted as part of our photo contest. This older gentleman looks so happy, right? He did give permission, or asked the student actually to take this photo. And when the student submitted it, they gave a pretty great context. And here's just a little snippet from the overall context. Perceptions about Cuba being a time capsule where life has remained stagnant since the 1960s are false. Cuba, its people, its politics, and its culture are ever changing. Nothing showcases this paradox better than the use of automobiles. While the exteriors are old, most cars are filled with new engines that are constantly updated. Likewise, though perceived as being stuck in the past, Cuban people are constantly innovating. So I think a lot of us have seen, those photos of Cuba with cars from the 1950s. And without that context, perhaps we're perpetuating some stereotypes. So this is such a phenomenal example. So submit great photos after you return from abroad. We're really excited to see them. So on our last CGIS brief for the winter 2022 semester, it's going to be on Thursday, April 21st, same time, same link, and we're going to be talking about the colonial roots of study abroad.